Little black girl ran to bikers crying, "They took my brother." What they did next went viral online. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It all began at a carnival in a small town, the kind where families gather, enjoying the smell of popcorn and the laughter echoing from the rides. But amid all the joy and excitement, a little black girl, no more than 8 or 9, ran into the biker booth. Her sundress was torn, her hair tangled, and her face was streaked with tears. "They took my brother," she screamed, pointing at a silver SUV speeding away in the distance. The bikers, who were just there enjoying the day, were immediately taken aback. They hadn't been involved in any kind of trouble in years. They were trying to stay out of it all. But this was different. This was a child in need. Jack Hawk Morrison, the leader of the Iron Riders, a rough-and-tumble motorcycle club that had seen its fair share of dangerous situations, didn't hesitate. He exchanged a look with his crew, and they knew. This was their moment. Hawk knelt down to the girl's level, his leather jacket creaking as he crouched. His deep voice softened as he asked, "What's your name, kiddo?" "Aisha." "Aisha Coleman," the girl said, her voice shaking. She pointed again, her little finger trembling in the direction of the road. "They took my brother. His name is Jamal. They put him in a silver car. Please, you have to help him." The words hit Hawk like a punch to the gut. Aisha's desperation was clear, but what really made the situation personal for him was the name she said, Coleman. He had known Aisha's father, Rick Coleman, many years ago when he was still part of the club. Rick had left the club a few years back, seeking a quieter life with his family. It seemed that even after leaving, Rick's past was catching up with him in the worst way. Hawk's mind raced as he stood up and signaled for his crew to move. "We're going after them," Hawk said firmly, looking each of his men in the eye. His decision was met with a series of nods from his crew. They had no idea what they were about to walk into, but they knew one thing for sure. They couldn't let a child down. They had made promises before, and they intended to keep them. "Where did they go?" Hawk asked, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. Aisha pointed at a silver SUV that had just pulled away, its taillights flickering in the distance. "That way. They have a sticker on the back with a skull and snake eyes," she said. The description was enough. Hawk knew exactly who was behind this. The Serpents, a rival motorcycle gang known for their violent reputation and ruthless dealings. They didn't just mess with anyone. They had a vendetta, and now it seemed it was Rick's family they were targeting. Without missing a beat, Hawk radioed his team. "All bikes ready. Let's go. We'll catch them before they get too far." The roar of engines filled the air as the Iron Riders revved their bikes, preparing to chase down the kidnappers. But as the group sped out of the carnival grounds, Hawk couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his gut. Something wasn't right. The Serpents weren't just kidnapping a child. There was something bigger at play here. Hawk clenched his jaw. "We don't leave anyone behind," he muttered under his breath, as the convoy of bikes surged forward. The chase was on, and the stakes were higher than they'd ever been before. The engines roared as the convoy of Iron Riders cut through the night, the sound of their bikes filling the air like a symphony of thunder. Hawk, the leader of the group, kept his focus on the road ahead. His hands gripped the handlebars tightly, his mind racing with the same question that had been haunting him since Aisha ran up to them. What had the Serpents gotten themselves into now? The silver SUV had vanished into the darkness, but Hawk knew they weren't going to let that vehicle out of their sight. Not tonight. They weren't just chasing down a kidnapping. There was something deeper, something far more dangerous lurking beneath the surface. He glanced to his left, where Bear, the club's enforcer, was riding right alongside him. Bear's eyes were sharp, scanning the road as he had done countless times before. This wasn't their first high-stakes chase, but it felt different. There was an urgency to it, something that made Hawk's stomach twist with unease. "You sure about this, Hawk?" Bear's deep voice crackled through the radio. Hawk didn't look at him, but he could hear the tension in his voice. "We don't leave our own behind," Hawk replied simply. They all knew the rules, but this was different. Rick Coleman had walked away from the club years ago, seeking a better life for his family. They had respected his decision then, but now, his past had come back to haunt him, and his family was paying the price. Hawk's thoughts drifted to Aisha again, the little girl who had run to them, terrified, desperate for help. She had barely been able to speak through her tears, but Hawk had heard her loud and clear. They had to get Jamal back. Where are they, Bear? Hawk's voice was calm, but his mind was anything but. Still heading east on County Road 14, Bear replied. I've got eyes on them. Hawk's heart pounded harder as the miles stretched out in front of him. They were gaining on the SUV. The convoy of riders sped up, engines roaring louder as they surged forward. Hawk could feel the wind against his face, his mind sharpening with every passing mile. They were getting closer. They couldn't lose them now. Aisha's words echoed in his head. They took my brother. Hawk's jaw clenched. They had to get there before the Serpents disappeared into the night with Jamal. The road ahead was a blur of headlights, darkened trees, and the occasional flicker of a streetlight. Hawk's eyes never left the road, his mind calculating their next move. They were getting closer, but there was something about this chase that felt wrong. The Serpents weren't just running away with Jamal, they were sending a message. They had targeted Rick's family for a reason. And Hawk had a sinking feeling in his gut that the reason went much deeper than just old club grudges. We need to split up, Hawk said into the radio, his voice steady. Bear, take the lead with Clutch. And Diesel, stay on the tail of that SUV. The rest of us will cover the other routes. We're not letting them slip through. Copy that, Bear responded. The convoy adjusted their formation, the riders splitting into two groups, both moving swiftly and silently through the night. Hawk's group veered off onto Riverside Parkway, while Bear's team stayed on the main road, ready to block any attempt to escape. The chase had entered a new phase, and Hawk wasn't about to let the Serpents get away. A few miles ahead, the highway split. Hawk had a hunch. They were nearing the industrial district. The area was full of dead ends and narrow streets. It was the perfect place to lose someone. Hawk's mind raced as they neared the junction. He wasn't about to let the Serpents turn this into a game of cat and mouse. Clutch, Charlie team, block the exits. Hawk ordered, his voice cool and precise. We're cutting them off. Understood, Clutch responded. The rest of the convoy sped ahead, their bikes weaving between traffic as they positioned themselves. Hawk's grip on the handlebars tightened as they reached the junction. The silver SUV was still in sight, but it was clear the driver was getting nervous. The car swerved slightly, trying to evade their pursuit. Hawk's instincts kicked in. He's trying to lose us in the maze, he muttered, his eyes scanning the road ahead. Stay with him. As they entered the industrial district, the air felt heavier. The streets narrowed, and the buildings loomed like shadows, their broken windows reflecting the dim light. The Serpents were running out of options. Hawk could see the SUV slowing, trying to find a way out. But it was too late. Clutch and his team had already positioned themselves at the main intersection, cutting off their escape. He's boxed in. Diesel's voice crackled through the radio. Hawk grinned. It's over. The silver SUV tried to make a break for it, but it was too late. The convoy had closed in. Hawk could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as they neared the final stretch. They were going to get Jamal back. Hawk pushed his bike harder, the roar of his engine echoing in the empty streets. This was it. The end of the line for the Serpents, and the beginning of something much bigger. The fight was just getting started. The silver SUV screeched to a halt at the end of the industrial district, its tires smoking from the sudden stop. The convoy of iron riders surrounded the vehicle, their motorcycles revving like a wall of steel and fury. Hawk, still gripping the handlebars tightly, could feel the tension rising in his chest. They had the Serpents trapped, but the real challenge was just beginning. As the bikes came to a stop, Hawk signaled for the others to hold their positions. He could see the Serpents inside the SUV, their eyes darting around, realizing they were out of options. The man in the driver's seat, a scowling figure with a tattooed neck, turned to his passenger, a younger guy with panic written all over his face. We're screwed, the driver muttered, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Hawk moved slowly, deliberately, towards the SUV, his boots crunching against the gravel. His shadow stretched long in the dim light as he approached the window, where the driver stared at him with a mix of defiance and fear. Step out of the car, Hawk ordered, his voice low and controlled. Now. The man inside hesitated, then reached for the door handle. The younger passenger seemed ready to bolt, but Hawk's cold stare stopped him in his tracks. "Don't even think about it," Hawk warned, his voice carrying an edge that made the hair on the back of the man's neck stand up. The door creaked open, and the driver stepped out, his boots heavy on the ground. He was a large man, his frame broad, muscles bulging under his leather jacket. But the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Hawk knew that this wasn't just about the girl anymore. This was about a deeper vendetta. This was the Serpents, sending a message that wasn't just about revenge on Rick Coleman. This was personal. The driver slowly raised his hands, his fingers twitching as if reaching for something. Hawk didn't wait for him to make the first move. "Where's Jamal?" Hawk demanded. The man swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "He's in there," he said, pointing toward a darkened warehouse at the far end of the street. The tension in Hawk's chest tightened, but he kept his cool. "What do you want with him?" "We're just following orders." The driver spat, his defiance returning for a moment. "Orders from who?" Hawk asked, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get to play innocent here. This isn't just some random kidnapping. You know who we are." The driver seemed to hesitate, but then he muttered something under his breath that Hawk could barely make out. "Viper," he said quietly. Hawk's blood ran cold. Viper Santana. The name sent a shiver down his spine. The leader of the Serpents, a man with a reputation for cruelty and power, had been trying to control the streets for years. If Viper was behind this, things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. Hawk turned to Bear, who was still standing at the ready, his eyes scanning the area. "Get the others." "We're going in," Hawk said, his voice steely. "But stay sharp. This is bigger than we thought." Bear nodded, and the rest of the crew began to move, their motorcycles roaring to life as they followed Hawk toward the warehouse. The door was cracked open just enough to slip inside. Hawk motioned for the others to hold back as he approached the entrance. It was too quiet, too still. This wasn't how the Serpents usually operated. They liked chaos. They liked noise. Something was wrong. He carefully pushed the door open and stepped inside, his boots making no sound on the concrete floor. His eyes adjusted to the dim light as he scanned the interior. The warehouse was empty, except for the sound of footsteps echoing from the back. Hawk motioned for Bear to flank him, and the two of them moved forward, their bodies low and prepared for anything. They reached the back of the warehouse, and that's when they saw him. Jamal. He was tied to a chair in the center of the room, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. But what made Hawk's blood run cold wasn't just the boy's condition. It was the sight of Viper standing over him, his cold smile stretching across his face. Well, Viper said, his voice dripping with venom. "Look who finally decided to show up. You think you can just waltz in here and take him? You're making a big mistake, Viper." Hawk growled, his fists clenching. "Let him go." Viper chuckled, shaking his head slowly. "You really think I'm afraid of you? You're nothing but a bunch of old men playing dress-up, pretending to be heroes. You don't have the guts to do what needs to be done." Hawk's eyes never left the man in front of him. The tension was thick, almost suffocating. But Hawk wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. He took a step forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You're wrong, Viper. We're not here to play games. We're here to finish what you started." As Hawk spoke, he motioned to Bear, who moved quickly, circling around the room to keep the exit covered. The Serpents were outnumbered, but Viper was dangerous. He wouldn't go down without a fight. The room seemed to hold its breath as the standoff continued. Viper's smile faded slightly, and for the first time, Hawk saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. That was when Hawk knew. This fight wasn't over yet. The silence in the warehouse was suffocating, the air thick with tension. Hawk's eyes locked onto Viper, the leader of the Serpents, standing a few feet away. Jamal, still tied to the chair, was watching the confrontation unfold, his eyes wide with fear. But what struck Hawk the most was the cold smirk on Viper's face. A man who was used to being in control, who believed that fear was his weapon. "You think you can stop me?" Viper taunted, his voice laced with venom. "You're out of your depth, Hawk. You don't have the firepower to take me down. You never did." Hawk felt the anger rise within him, but he knew that losing his temper would only play into Viper's hands. This wasn't just about a fight. This was about survival, for Jamal and for the club. "I've got something you don't have, Viper," Hawk replied, his voice low but steady. "Loyalty. A reason to fight that goes beyond power." Viper chuckled darkly, his hand resting on the handle of a knife at his belt. Loyalty? You're delusional. The world runs on power. Power that I have. And now, I'm going to take back what's mine. Hawk didn't flinch. He'd seen men like Viper before. Men who thought their power made them untouchable. But power was fleeting. Loyalty, however, was unbreakable. Behind him, Bear, Diesel, and the rest of the Iron Riders stood ready, their expressions hard as stone. Every member of the crew knew what had to be done. They weren't backing down. You've taken enough from people, Viper, Hawk continued, his eyes never leaving the man in front of him. You've hurt too many. But this time, you're not getting away. Viper's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of irritation. He wasn't used to being talked to like this, to someone challenging his authority. You think you can just walk in here and lecture me? He spat. You've got no idea what you're dealing with. Hawk's eyes narrowed. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A man who hides behind fear and violence because he's too weak to face his own demons. There was a brief pause, a silent standoff. The Serpents, who had been watching the scene unfold, stood frozen, unsure of what their leader would do next. Viper's hand twitched, and Hawk knew the moment was coming. With a quick movement, Viper pulled the knife from his belt, brandishing it in front of him like a weapon. But before he could make a move, Bear's voice rang out, cold and commanding. You won't get the chance. Bear, with his towering frame and massive presence, was the first to step forward, his hand gripping the handle of his own weapon. Viper's eyes widened as he realized the stakes had just changed. The Serpents, who had once felt invincible in their numbers, now saw the Iron Riders closing in, surrounding them. Hawk, however, kept his focus on Viper. He wasn't interested in a brawl. Not yet. Not until he had the answers he needed. Where's the rest of your crew, Viper? Hawk asked, his voice sharp. Where's the backup you always rely on? Viper smirked again, but it was laced with bitterness. You think I'm scared of a few bikers? He sneered. I don't need them to finish this. I've already won. Not yet, Hawk said firmly. With a sharp motion, he signaled Bear to advance, and within seconds, the rest of the club was in position. The standoff was reaching its breaking point. Viper's confidence was faltering, and Hawk could see the cracks forming in the Serpent's armor. Hawk stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Viper. You've got two choices, Viper, Hawk said, his voice hard as steel. You can walk away and live to see another day, or you can stay and face the consequences of your actions. Viper's eyes flickered with something Hawk couldn't quite place. Was it fear? Was it doubt? Or was he just calculating his next move? The room was silent, the tension so thick that it could be cut with a knife. Jamal, still tied to the chair, watched the exchange with wide, terrified eyes. He was just a kid. He didn't deserve any of this. Hawk knew he had to end it now, before things went any further. I'm not giving you a choice, Hawk said, his voice calm, but unwavering. Release Jamal, and leave. Now, or we'll do this the hard way. Viper's hand tightened around the knife, but instead of charging, he hesitated. For the first time in a long time, he was unsure. Hawk could see it in his eyes. You've got nothing left, Viper, Hawk pressed. This ends now. A tense silence followed, broken only by the sound of Viper's breathing, ragged and uneven. He was cornered, and Hawk could see the calculation happening in his mind. The cold smile returned, but it was different now. You think I'll just walk away? Viper finally said, his voice low and menacing. I'll never walk away from what's mine. Before anyone could react, Viper lunged, the knife flashing in the dim light. But Hawk was faster. With a swift movement, he grabbed Viper's wrist, twisting it, and forcing the weapon to the ground. This is over, Hawk said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Viper struggled, but Hawk's grip was unyielding. The Serpents were outmatched, and they knew it. Hawk called to his crew, get Jamal out of here. Now, the bikers moved quickly, and within moments, Jamal was free from the chair, his terrified expression slowly giving way to relief. As the Iron Riders took control of the situation, Viper's face twisted with rage and helplessness. He had lost, and Hawk had won, but the battle wasn't over. Not yet. The warehouse was eerily silent now, with only the sound of heavy breathing filling the space. Hawk stood over Viper, his grip still tight around the Serpent leader's arm. The knife was on the ground, discarded, as Viper struggled in vain to break free. His crew had backed off, realizing they were outnumbered, and with each passing second, the situation was slipping further out of their control. Jamal, now freed from the chair, stood next to Bear, looking at the bikers with a mix of relief and confusion in his eyes. Aisha was nearby, her small frame shaking but filled with gratitude. She hadn't fully understood what had just happened, but she knew one thing for sure. The bikers had saved her brother. "Get the hell off me," Viper growled, his voice low and dangerous. Hawk didn't flinch. "You're done, Viper. This ends tonight." The power dynamic had shifted. The Serpents, once feared and untouchable, were now at the mercy of the Iron Riders. Hawk could see the defeat in Viper's eyes. The tough exterior was cracking. "You think I'm afraid of you?" Viper sneered. "You're nothing but a bunch of washed-up bikers. You'll never win this." Hawk's expression remained calm, his voice steady. "You're already losing, Viper. Your crew's finished, your empire's crumbling. You've made too many enemies." "I still have power," Viper hissed, his eyes wild with anger. "I'll come for you. I'll come for all of you." Hawk stepped forward, his shadow looming over the downed man. "You're not going anywhere. You've taken enough lives, ruined enough families. But you're done now." He motioned to Bear, who immediately stepped forward to secure Viper, his large hands wrapping around the man's wrists, tightening with a sense of finality. "Take him out of here," Hawk ordered. "We'll let the authorities deal with him from here." Bear nodded and dragged Viper towards the exit, the defeated leader stumbling along with him. The rest of the bikers stood in silent solidarity, their eyes fixed on the scene. Hawk turned back to Jamal, his face softening as he approached the boy. "You're safe now," he said, placing a hand on Jamal's shoulder. Jamal looked up at him, his eyes wide. "Thank you. I thought I was never going to see my sister again." Hawk smiled, the weight of the moment sinking in. "No thanks needed. We protect our own." Aisha ran up to her brother, her arms wrapping around him in a tight embrace. The two siblings stood together, reunited, as the chaos of the past few hours began to settle. But Hawk's mind was still racing. They had saved Jamal. They had taken down Viper. But the fight wasn't over. There was always more to the story, and Hawk knew this was just the beginning. As the bikers began to gather their things, getting ready to leave the warehouse, a loud engine roared to life outside. Hawk's heart skipped a beat. He knew that sound. He turned to see a familiar figure on a motorcycle pulling into the lot. It was Rick, Aisha, and Jamal's father. The man who had left the club years ago in search of a better life for his family. The man who had never wanted this. Rick's face was a mixture of confusion, relief, and guilt as he saw the scene unfolding in front of him. He didn't speak immediately, his eyes scanning the bikers, the wrecked warehouse, and his two children. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough from years of silence. "I didn't ask for this." Hawk stepped forward, his eyes meeting Rick's. "You didn't ask for any of it, Rick. But this is your family, and we're not going to let anything happen to them. Not on our watch." Rick's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, it seemed as if the weight of everything had finally hit him. "I never wanted this for them," Rick whispered, his voice breaking. "I left the club to give them a chance at something better." Hawk nodded slowly. "You made a choice, Rick. But your family's still here, and we've got your back. We always have." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them easing slightly. Then, Hawk looked back at the rest of the crew. "We're done here. Let's get out of here before the cops show up." As the bikers revved their engines and began to leave, Rick turned to his children, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and love. Aisha and Jamal ran to him, and he embraced them both tightly, vowing silently to protect them, no matter the cost. Hawk watched the family reunite, his own heart heavy with the weight of the past. The fight was far from over, but for now, they had won. They had saved Jamal. They had stopped the Serpents. And as the Iron Riders rode off into the night, Hawk knew that no matter what came next, they would always protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The Iron Riders rode through the night, the distant hum of their engines reverberating through the quiet streets. Hawk's mind was still reeling from the events of the past few hours. They had saved Jamal, taken down Viper, and reunited a family that had been torn apart by violence. But even as the convoy of bikes rode together, Hawk knew that peace was temporary. The road ahead was never smooth. As they reached the outskirts of town, Hawk glanced back at Rick, who was still following in his truck, a somber expression on his face. He had his children back, but Hawk knew that nothing would ever be the same. Rick had left the club for a reason, but the past had a way of catching up with people. The club's dark history, the dangerous world they had all once been a part of, wasn't something you could just walk away from. "We need to talk, Hawk." Rick's voice came through on the radio, interrupting Hawk's thoughts. "Pull over." Hawk nodded to Bear, who was leading the convoy. "Stop here," he said, pulling off the road into a small clearing by the side of the highway. The rest of the crew slowed down, parking their bikes in a loose circle. Hawk dismounted, his boots hitting the gravel with a soft crunch as he walked toward Rick's truck. Rick got out, his face etched with lines of exhaustion and regret. He didn't meet Hawk's eyes at first, instead glancing down at the ground, his hands shoved into his pockets. "I never wanted this life for my kids," Rick said quietly, his voice heavy with guilt. "I left the club to protect them, to give them something better. But somehow, I ended up bringing them back into this mess." Hawk looked at him for a moment, the weight of their past hanging in the air between them. "Rick, you didn't bring them into this. Viper and his crew, they're the ones who came after you. We just did what we had to do." Rick shook his head, frustration clear in his features. "But that's the thing, Hawk. I can't escape the past. And now, my kids, they've seen things they shouldn't have to. They'll never be the same." Hawk sighed, stepping closer to Rick. "You can't change the past, man. But you're here now, and that counts for something." Rick finally looked up at Hawk, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. "I don't know how to protect them anymore. I've tried so hard to keep them away from all this. But it's like it keeps finding us." Hawk placed a hand on Rick's shoulder, his grip firm. "You protect them by being here for them. You've got a second chance now. Don't throw it away. We're family, Rick, and we're not going anywhere." The weight in Rick's eyes seemed to lighten a bit, but the worry still lingered. "I don't even know where to start." Hawk gave a small, reassuring smile. "Start by being their father. That's all they need." The sound of a motorcycle engine broke the quiet between them, and both men turned to see Bear walking towards them. He had his helmet off, his face serious. "We've got company," he said, his voice low. Hawk tensed, instinctively reaching for the handle of his bike. "Who is it?" Bear looked out into the distance, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "Two vehicles, approaching fast. I don't think they're here for a friendly chat." Hawk felt his stomach tighten. The Serpents might be down, but their allies could still be a problem. "Get the others ready," Hawk said, his voice firm. Bear nodded and walked back toward the bikes. Hawk turned back to Rick. "This isn't over yet. Stay close, and keep the kids safe." Rick's face hardened, determination flooding his features. "I'm not going anywhere." Hawk gave him one last nod before turning to face the rest of the crew. The Iron Riders were no strangers to danger, and they would face whatever came next together. The convoy gathered quickly, their bikes roaring to life as they prepared for whatever the night would throw at them. Hawk's mind raced as he looked at the two approaching vehicles in the distance. This time, they wouldn't be caught off guard. The Iron Riders had made a promise. They would protect those who couldn't protect themselves. They had done it before, and they would do it again. The road ahead was long, and Hawk knew the dangers weren't over. But for now, they had each other, and that was all that mattered. The two vehicles came into view, their headlights slicing through the dark night. Hawk stood at the front of the Iron Riders, his eyes narrowed as he studied the approaching threat. They had been ready for anything since they first set out to find Jamal, but this felt different. The tension in the air was thick, and Hawk's instincts told him this wasn't just some random encounter. The Serpents might be finished for now, but their allies were still lurking in the shadows. The convoy of bikers revved their engines in unison, the sound rumbling like thunder. Bear stood beside Hawk, his expression grim. "They're not stopping," Bear said, his voice low and steady. "This doesn't feel like a friendly greeting." Hawk nodded, never taking his eyes off the two vehicles as they neared. He could see the faint silhouettes of men in the front seat, and he knew instantly that these weren't casual drivers. These were people looking for trouble. The Iron Riders were prepared for trouble. Hawk signaled to his crew. "Stay sharp, keep your distance. We don't know what we're up against." The riders fell into formation behind him, their bikes cutting through the night as they approached the vehicles. The convoy slowed, and Hawk's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. What were the Serpents' allies doing here? Who were these men? As the two vehicles came to a halt, the doors opened, and figures stepped out. The first man was tall, with a heavy build and a scar that ran down his left cheek. He walked with a confidence that immediately set Hawk on edge. Behind him, the second figure was shorter but equally menacing, his hands resting on his belt, fingers twitching as though ready to draw a weapon at any moment. Hawk kept his posture steady, his gaze unwavering. The standoff was tense, the night air charged with the threat of violence. The tall man with the scar looked at Hawk and sneered. "You're the famous Hawk, huh? The so-called protector of the weak." Hawk's voice was calm, but the edge in it was unmistakable. "I'm not here to fight with you. I don't want any trouble." The man chuckled darkly. "Trouble? You're already in trouble, buddy. You just don't know it yet." He took a few steps forward, his eyes scanning the Iron Riders as though trying to size them up. Hawk didn't flinch. He wasn't going to back down. Not this time. "What do you want?" Hawk asked, his voice sharp. The man with the scar stopped a few feet away from Hawk, his smirk never fading. "We want to make sure you understand something, Hawk," he said, his tone low and dangerous. "The Serpents may be gone, but the family doesn't forget. You don't just walk away from us. You don't make enemies like Viper and think there won't be consequences." Hawk's heart raced, but his exterior remained calm. He had dealt with men like this before, people who used intimidation to get what they wanted. But intimidation didn't work on the Iron Riders. "I didn't make enemies with Viper. He made enemies with us," Hawk said, his voice firm. The man with the scar laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? That you can just show up and protect anyone you want, without paying the price? Well, there's always a price." Hawk took a step closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. "I'm not afraid of you. You've already lost. Viper's gone, and so are you." The man's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Hawk thought he saw the flicker of anger flash across his face. But then the man just smiled, a twisted, cruel smile. "You're right. We've lost Viper. But we haven't lost everything. We still have a lot of friends. And they're going to make sure you pay for what you've done." The words hung in the air, and Hawk could see the rest of the crew moving into position, their eyes scanning the men in front of them. They weren't going to let these guys walk away. Not without a fight. But Hawk wasn't ready to escalate things just yet. He had to figure out who they were dealing with. "Who are you working for?" Hawk demanded, his voice sharp. The man with the scar didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small piece of paper. He tossed it to Hawk, and as Hawk caught it, he saw the name written on it. Marcus Viper. Hawk's eyes narrowed. "So you're working for the Viper's replacement?" he asked. The man with the scar just shrugged. "Viper may be gone, but the Serpents live on. And now we're here to make sure you understand that." Hawk's mind raced. Marcus Viper, Viper's son, or at least someone close enough to take his place. This wasn't just about the bikers anymore. This was about power, revenge, and a fight for control. And Hawk knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone threaten his family. "I've had enough of this," Hawk said, his voice cold. He turned to Bear, who gave him a nod. The signal was clear. The Iron Riders weren't going to back down. The two men in front of them may have thought they had power, but they were about to learn that the Iron Riders would never give up. The night was far from over, and Hawk knew this battle was just beginning. The air was thick with tension as Hawk stood facing the two men in front of him, the Iron Riders surrounding them like a wall of steel. The road they had been traveling on had taken an unexpected turn, and now the stakes were higher than ever. The man with the scar, still smirking, was clearly ready for a fight. He could sense that Hawk was no longer willing to back down. "You think you can intimidate me with your little gang?" the scarred man taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. "We're just getting started, buddy. You think you can stand against what's coming?" Hawk didn't flinch. He had heard these threats before, and they didn't faze him. He had lived through far worse. But there was something different about this situation. The mention of Marcus Viper's name had made it clear that the Serpents weren't just a street gang anymore. They were organized, connected, and willing to do whatever it took to reclaim their lost power. "This isn't about intimidation," Hawk replied, his voice steady and firm. "This is about survival. For you and for me. You think you're going to walk away from this without consequences? Think again." The scarred man's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward, his hand moving toward his belt. Hawk's instincts kicked in, and in one smooth motion, he reached for his own weapon, the cold metal of his knife meeting his grip. "You don't want this," Hawk warned, his eyes locked on the man. "You don't want to make me do something you'll regret." The scarred man hesitated, then turned to his companion, who had been silently watching the exchange. The smaller man, his hands still on his belt, nodded subtly, as if signaling that it was time to escalate. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the engines of the Iron Riders' bikes humming in the background. Hawk knew what this meant. They had no intention of backing down. The scarred man finally spoke, his voice colder now. You don't get it, do you? The Serpents are coming for everything. This city, this town, it's all ours. And you're standing in the way. Hawk stepped forward, his presence imposing. Not anymore. Not while I'm still breathing. You've done enough damage already. It ends tonight. The scarred man smirked, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes now. You think you can stop us? Hawk's voice was unwavering. I don't need to stop you. I just need to outlast you. And I will. Without another word, the scarred man lunged, his hand pulling out a concealed knife, the gleam of the blade catching the dim light. But Hawk was faster. In an instant, he stepped aside, using the momentum of the man's attack to send him stumbling past. The man's knife slashed the air, but Hawk's precise movements avoided the strike. The Iron Riders moved into position, surrounding the men, their hands on their weapons, but waiting for the command. The smaller man looked around, realizing the odds were against them. He tried to make a move toward the vehicles, but Bear was already blocking his path. The standoff was over. You don't have to do this, the smaller man said, his voice cracking, a flicker of fear breaking through his bravado. Hawk raised an eyebrow. It's too late for that. You made your choice when you came after this family. Now, you're going to pay the price. The scarred man, now off balance and with no way out, reached for his knife again, but Bear was on him in a flash, disarming him with ease. Hawk moved closer, his voice low and dangerous. You're done. This ends here. The two men stood frozen, realizing the fight was over. The Iron Riders weren't backing down. Hawk turned to his crew, giving a subtle nod. Take them down. Let's get this over with. The rest of the Iron Riders stepped forward, securing the two men, making sure they wouldn't be a threat. As they took control of the situation, Hawk's mind raced. This was bigger than just a few serpents looking for revenge. Marcus Viper's name echoed in his thoughts, a reminder that this was only the beginning. Viper's son, or whoever had taken his place, was still out there, waiting to make his move. The night wasn't over. As the Iron Riders loaded the men into the back of one of their vehicles, Hawk knew that this was only a temporary victory. They had stopped one threat, but there would be more to come. This wasn't the end of the war. It was just the first battle. Hawk turned to Bear, who was already looking at him with the same grim expression. This isn't over, is it? Bear asked. Hawk shook his head slowly. No, this is just the beginning. We have to be ready for whatever comes next. The Iron Riders gathered their bikes, ready to ride out once again. The fight for control of the streets wasn't over, and Hawk knew that the next few days would be crucial. They had taken down one leader, but Marcus Viper's shadow still loomed large over the horizon, and Hawk was ready to face whatever came next. The roar of the engines filled the night as the Iron Riders rode off into the distance, the road ahead uncertain but filled with purpose. The night air was cooler now, a slight breeze rustling through the trees as the Iron Riders rode through the empty streets. Hawk's mind was still racing after the confrontation with the Serpents, but there was something else gnawing at him. Marcus Viper was out there, and Hawk knew that his role in this fight wasn't over. He glanced at the rest of the crew, their faces illuminated by the glow of their bike lights, each man lost in their thoughts. The city had changed over the years, but the threats remained the same. They had just dealt with one, but Hawk knew that as long as Marcus Viper was alive, the Iron Riders wouldn't have peace. As the convoy approached a quiet intersection, Bear, who had been riding in front, signaled for everyone to slow down. Hawk's eyes scanned the road ahead, and he could see a figure standing at the corner. A man, tall, broad-shouldered. Hawk's instincts flared. Something wasn't right. The figure stepped into the middle of the road, his silhouette outlined by the dim streetlight. As they got closer, Hawk could make out his face. It was a man they had seen before, a former ally of the Serpents who had disappeared from the scene years ago. He was standing still, waiting for them. What the hell is he doing here? Diesel muttered, his voice coming through Hawk's radio. He's not supposed to be around here. Hawk's jaw tightened. Pull over, he ordered. The Iron Riders pulled to the side of the road, their bikes, idling as they watched the man slowly approach. He wasn't armed, but Hawk didn't trust him. Not for a second. The man stopped a few feet in front of Hawk, his expression unreadable. "Hawk," he said, his voice low and gruff. "It's been a long time." Hawk studied him for a moment before responding. "I thought you were out of the game." The man smirked. "You know how it is. You can leave, but the game doesn't leave you." "Not really." Hawk didn't say anything. He wasn't sure what this man wanted, but he wasn't about to let his guard down. "What do you want?" Hawk asked, his voice cold. The man glanced around, his eyes flicking from one biker to another. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to warn you." Hawk raised an eyebrow. "Warn me about what?" The man's eyes shifted nervously. "The Serpents. They're regrouping. You think Viper's gone for good? You're wrong. Marcus is moving fast. And he's got a plan." Hawk's heart skipped a beat. Marcus Viper. It wasn't enough that they had taken down his father. Now his son was after them, planning something far bigger. "What kind of plan?" Hawk demanded. The man hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't know the details, but I know it's bad. You're going to want to be ready for it." "Why should I trust you?" Hawk asked. "You left the game. You've been out of touch for years." The man looked down, a flicker of regret passing through his eyes. "I made mistakes, but I'm not the enemy here. Marcus Viper is. He's going to take control of everything. And if you're not careful, he'll come for you next." Hawk studied the man for a moment, weighing his words. Could he trust him? Was this some kind of trap? But then, Hawk realized they had no choice. They had to stay one step ahead of Marcus. "How do we find him?" Hawk asked. The man smirked again. "You already have." He turned and pointed to the darkened street ahead. "He's been watching you. You think you've been moving in the shadows, but he's always a step ahead." Hawk's mind raced. The Serpents were always calculating, always scheming. But if Marcus was already here, if he was watching them, that meant they had to move fast. "What do you want in return for this information?" Hawk asked. The man's eyes flickered to the rest of the crew before returning to Hawk. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I'm just trying to survive. If you can stop Marcus, then maybe there's hope for all of us. But it's on you now. You've got to stop him before he gets too powerful." Hawk nodded, his face hardening. "We will." The man took a step back, his eyes scanning the road behind him. "Good luck, Hawk. You'll need it." Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving the Iron Riders standing in the stillness of the empty street. Hawk stood there for a moment, the weight of the situation settling in. Marcus Viper was no longer just an obstacle. He was a threat, and Hawk had no intention of letting him take everything they had fought for. He turned to Bear, his voice low. "We need to move. Now." The rest of the crew revved their engines, and without hesitation, they sped off down the road, the sound of their motorcycles echoing in the night. The battle was far from over. But Hawk was ready. He had to be. For the club, for the family, and for the future. The Iron Riders would fight, and they would win. The night stretched on as the Iron Riders navigated the dark roads, the weight of the man's words echoing in Hawk's mind. Marcus Viper wasn't just playing for control, he was planning something much bigger. Hawk could feel the tension building with every mile, the pressure of what was to come settling in like a storm waiting to break. The crew followed him silently, each man lost in his own thoughts, knowing the battle ahead wouldn't be easy. But they were a family, and they had survived worse. The moonlight flickered as the convoy entered the heart of the city, the streets eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Hawk signaled to Bear, who pulled up alongside him. "What's the plan?" Bear asked, his voice steady. Hawk glanced over, his mind working through the possibilities. "We need to find out where Marcus is hiding," he replied, his tone low but determined. "He's been watching us, and we're going to find him before he finds us." The convoy slowed as they approached a familiar street, the old warehouse district looming ahead. Hawk had spent enough time on these streets to know every corner, every alley. It was the perfect place for the Serpents to lie low, hidden in plain sight. "This is where we start," Hawk said, his voice hardening. "We split up, check the warehouses, and find out who's been moving in and out." Bear nodded, his eyes narrowing. "You think it's a trap?" "It's a trap if we don't stay ahead of him," Hawk replied, his eyes scanning the area. The Iron Riders were prepared for whatever came next. They had to be. The warehouse district was a maze of narrow roads and dark corners, the perfect place for someone like Marcus to hide. They parked their bikes at a strategic point, their engines cutting off with a deep rumble that echoed through the empty streets. Hawk motioned for the crew to split up. Diesel and Falcon would take the north side of the district, while Bear, Shadow, and Hawk would cover the southern entrance. Stay sharp, Hawk reminded them. If Marcus is here, we need to know fast. No mistakes. As they dispersed, Hawk's mind raced. Marcus Viper was a threat unlike any other. He wasn't just trying to take over the streets. He wanted something more. Power, control, revenge. And Hawk knew that the longer they waited, the harder it would be to stop him. The cold air seemed to bite at Hawk's skin as he walked through the maze of warehouses. Every step he took felt like it echoed in the silence, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was too quiet, too still. This wasn't just a simple hunt. There was something darker in the air. Hawk stopped at the corner of a building and signaled Bear, who was crouched a few feet ahead. Bear nodded and moved toward the next building, his eyes scanning every shadow. The Iron Riders were moving like a well-oiled machine, their training and experience guiding them through the dark. Hawk's hand rested on the handle of his knife, ready for anything. He could feel the tension building in the pit of his stomach. He knew Marcus would make a move soon. And when he did, Hawk wanted to be ready. As they approached the next building, Hawk spotted a flicker of movement in the shadows. He motioned for the others to stop, his body tense. They weren't alone. Someone was watching them. Hawk's pulse quickened, but he didn't make a move. Not yet. They needed to flush out whoever was watching. Hawk took a slow step forward, his senses heightened. He didn't have to wait long. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the moonlight. Hawk's eyes locked onto the man. He didn't recognize him, but there was something familiar about the way he moved. He was too calm, too calculated. Hawk knew this wasn't someone who just stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. This man was here for a reason. Who are you? Hawk asked, his voice steady. The man smiled, a slow, deliberate grin. Name's Ryan, he said, his voice low. I've been looking for you. Hawk's mind raced. Ryan. He had heard the name before. He had worked with the Serpents in the past. But why was he here? What do you want? Hawk asked again, his voice hardening. Ryan's grin widened. I'm not here to fight, Hawk, he said. I'm here to warn you. Marcus is closer than you think. And he's got a plan that's going to take you all down. Hawk's eyes narrowed. Why should I trust you? Ryan shrugged. You don't have to. But you will. You're in over your head. Marcus isn't playing by the same rules anymore. He's got people inside. People you don't even know about. Hawk's grip on his knife tightened, but he didn't move. Where is he? Ryan glanced around, his eyes darting to the other bikers. He's hiding in plain sight, Ryan said quietly. In the old district. But you'll never find him unless you know where to look. Hawk didn't say anything. His mind was already processing the information. Ryan wasn't lying. Marcus was close. And they needed to act fast. You've got one chance to prove you're telling the truth, Hawk said, his voice steady. Lead us to him. Ryan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Follow me. Hawk signaled for the crew to move out, and they followed Ryan through the maze of warehouses, every step closer to the heart of the Serpents' plan. They were running out of time, but Hawk wasn't going to stop until they found Marcus. This fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The eerie quiet of the warehouse district was suffocating as Hawk and the Iron Riders followed Ryan through the maze of dilapidated buildings. The faint smell of rust and oil hung in the air, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. Hawk's mind raced, processing the information Ryan had given them. Marcus Viper, the new leader of the Serpents, was hiding in plain sight, and Hawk could feel the weight of that knowledge hanging heavily on his shoulders. They had no idea just how deep Marcus's influence ran or who was working with him. All Hawk knew was that time was running out. They had to find him before Marcus executed whatever twisted plan he had in mind. Hawk exchanged looks with Bear, Diesel, and the rest of the crew. They had faced countless battles together, but this was different. This wasn't just about power. This was personal. The Serpents had always been a dangerous enemy, but now, with Marcus in charge, Hawk feared the worst. Ryan led them into a narrow alleyway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Hawk could see the tension in his movements, the way he glanced over his shoulder every few seconds. Ryan wasn't just guiding them. He was trying to stay ahead of whatever danger lurked around the corner. How much farther? Hawk asked, his voice calm but demanding. Ryan's pace quickened, and his eyes darted to the shadows. Not far, he said, his voice low. But you need to know something. Marcus is smart. He's got people in every corner of this city. The moment you get close, you'll be walking into a trap. Hawk's grip tightened on the handle of his knife. He wasn't worried about traps. He was worried about the unknown. They had no idea how many people Marcus had at his disposal or what kind of firepower they were up against. The last thing they needed was to walk into an ambush. "We're ready for anything," Bear said, his deep voice steady as ever. Hawk nodded, but the doubt in the pit of his stomach only grew stronger. They reached a rusted metal door at the end of the alley, barely visible in the dark. Ryan paused, glancing around once more before pushing the door open. The creak of the hinges echoed through the alley like a warning, but they didn't stop. The Iron Riders moved as one, entering the dimly lit space. Inside was a vast, empty room, filled with old crates and broken furniture. The air smelled of dust and stale air. Hawk's eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. It was too quiet. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This wasn't right. "Where is he?" Hawk demanded, his voice cold and sharp. Ryan motioned toward the far corner, where a large tarp covered something large and bulky. "He's there," Ryan said. Hawk's pulse quickened as he moved toward the tarp, his hand on the grip of his knife. The rest of the crew spread out, positioning themselves around the room, keeping their eyes peeled for any movement. Hawk reached the tarp and pulled it back with a swift motion, his heart racing. What he saw froze him in place. It wasn't Marcus. It wasn't anyone they knew. It was a trap. The tarp covered a massive pile of explosives, carefully arranged and connected with wires. Hawk's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about power. This was about destruction. "Get back!" Hawk shouted, but it was too late. The sound of the doors slamming shut behind them made his blood run cold. They were locked in. Ryan, standing behind them, grinned. "You walked right into it," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "Marcus is smarter than you think. He knew you'd come looking for him. And now, you're all dead." Hawk's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to face the rest of the crew. The Iron Riders were trapped, with no way out and the clock ticking. Ryan had played them. But Hawk wasn't going down without a fight. "We're not dying here," Hawk growled, his voice fierce. "We'll find a way out. We always do." Bear stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the door. "We're getting out of here, one way or another," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The tension in the room was palpable as Hawk and the crew started to work quickly. They couldn't afford to waste any time. Hawk's mind raced, calculating their options. They were out of their element, but they had dealt with worse. They had to find a way to disarm the explosives, but with no tools and no time, their chances were slim. "We need to move fast," Hawk said, his voice steady despite the pressure. "We don't have much time." Bear nodded and moved toward the explosives, studying the wires. Diesel and Shadow started looking for exits, but the room was sealed tight. Hawk knew they were running out of time. "Get ready to move," he ordered. "We find a way out, or we make our own." The crew was ready. They had been through hell and back together, and Hawk knew they wouldn't stop now. The trap had been set, but the Iron Riders weren't going down without a fight. They had always been the ones who others underestimated, but now, they were about to show Marcus Viper exactly what it meant to mess with the wrong crew. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours as the Iron Riders stood in the dimly lit warehouse, their backs against the wall, the sound of their own breathing the only thing they could hear. The room was thick with tension. Hawk's mind raced as he took in the situation. They had been lured into a trap, and now, they were running out of time. The explosives were rigged, and the man who had led them here, Ryan, was nowhere to be found. Hawk's eyes flicked to Bear, who was trying to carefully assess the bomb, the wires, the triggers, but it was no easy task. With no tools, no clear instructions, and no way of knowing what was connected to what, every second felt like an eternity. Diesel moved swiftly to the door, trying to force it open, but it didn't budge. The lock was reinforced. "We're stuck," Diesel muttered, his frustration clear. Hawk's fist clenched. "Not yet," he said through gritted teeth. The bomb ticking in the corner was the loudest sound in the room, each click echoing in their ears. Hawk couldn't let fear take over. The Iron Riders had been through worse, and they were damn sure going to make it through this too. "Focus," Hawk shouted to the crew. "We don't have much time. We need a plan." His words were like a rallying cry, and the riders snapped into action, each man focused on his task. Bear continued to examine the bomb, his face inches from the wires. "If I can cut the right wire, Bear started but was cut off by Hawk. Which wire? Hawk demanded. We don't have the luxury of guessing. Bear looked up at him, his expression hard. I'm not guessing, Hawk. I'm calculating. But we need a plan. Hawk nodded, his mind spinning through options. Okay. Diesel, get back to the door. See if you can find another exit. Shadow, check for any hidden switches or mechanisms. There's got to be something we missed. As Bear kept working on the bomb, Hawk stepped back, scanning the room. The urgency was growing. They couldn't keep wasting time. A few more seconds ticked by, and the pressure was overwhelming. Every moment that passed felt like a countdown to disaster. Hawk's eyes darted from the bomb to his crew. They weren't just fighting for their own survival now. They were fighting for their family, for everything they had built together. The lives of the people they had sworn to protect depended on their ability to get out of this. The sound of footsteps echoed from the entrance, and Hawk immediately went on alert, his eyes narrowing as he listened. Bear paused, his hands still on the wires. What is it? He whispered. Hawk motioned for everyone to be quiet. The footsteps grew louder, and Hawk could feel his pulse quicken. He had no time for distractions. He was about to bark out an order when the door slammed open, and Ryan stepped into the room, his face calm, as if nothing was wrong. Thought I'd come back and help, Ryan said with a twisted grin, his eyes scanning the room. Hawk didn't move. He wasn't about to give Ryan the satisfaction of knowing how close they were to losing everything. You thought you could just walk away? Hawk asked, his voice low and dangerous. Ryan shrugged, his grin never faltering. I'm not walking away. I just wanted to make sure you didn't blow yourselves up. Marcus would kill me if I let you go too easily. Hawk's eyes narrowed. Ryan was playing a dangerous game. You're still working for him, Hawk said, the disgust clear in his voice. Ryan smirked. Someone has to keep an eye on you idiots. Hawk clenched his fists. You brought us here. You set this whole thing up. And now you're acting like the hero. Ryan's eyes flicked to Bear, who was still trying to figure out the bomb. Don't worry, I've got a way to disarm it, Ryan said casually, stepping forward. But Hawk was done playing games. He wasn't about to trust someone who had already betrayed them. Not so fast, Hawk growled. If you think I'm going to trust you now, you're out of your mind. Ryan chuckled, unfazed by the tension. Fine, I'll let you do it your way. But you'll need me if you want out of here alive. The rest of the Iron Riders tensed, but Hawk held up his hand. He wasn't sure if he wanted to trust Ryan, but they had no other choice. What do you suggest? Hawk asked, his voice sharp. Ryan's grin widened. There's a way to disable the bomb, but you'll have to cut the right wire. The red one. Hawk's eyes flicked to the bomb. The wires were tangled and messy. The wrong move would set off the explosives, and they would all be done for. Hawk stepped forward, his eyes locked on the bomb. You better be right, he said, his voice full of threat. Ryan's smile didn't falter. I'm always right, he replied. Bear stepped back, giving Hawk space to work. Hawk carefully approached the bomb, his hands steady as he looked over the wires. His mind raced, calculating the risk of each move. He didn't have the luxury of a second chance. With a deep breath, Hawk made the cut. The wire fell to the floor with a soft snap, and the ticking stopped. Silence. They were safe. For now. Hawk stood there for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked up at Ryan, who was still standing by the door, watching with a smug look on his face. You're lucky, Hawk muttered. Ryan's grin widened. I don't believe in luck. Just skill. Hawk didn't respond. They had bigger problems to deal with. Hawk turned to his crew. Get the bikes. We're not done yet. As they made their way to the exit, Hawk's mind was already racing. The clock was ticking, and Marcus Viper was still out there. This was just the beginning. The engines of the Iron Riders roared to life as the convoy made its way out of the warehouse district, the night still heavy with tension. Hawk's mind was focused, his gaze unwavering as they cut through the streets. The danger wasn't over. They had survived the trap, but Marcus Viper was still out there, waiting, scheming. Hawk knew the clock was ticking. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. We've got to end this, Hawk muttered under his breath, the weight of their mission settling deep in his chest. Tonight. Bear glanced over at him, his face grim, sound amplified in the silence. They moved swiftly, silently, but Hawk couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was waiting for them. He wasn't going to make this easy. Stay sharp, Hawk whispered to the crew. He's here. I can feel it. They moved deeper into the warehouse, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. As they rounded a corner, Hawk's eyes locked onto the figure in the distance. Marcus Viper stood at the far end of the warehouse, a cold smirk on his face. His eyes flicked to the Iron Riders, and for a moment, it seemed like he wasn't surprised to see them. "I knew you'd come for me," Marcus said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You really think you can stop me? You're too late." Hawk's heart raced, but his voice was steady as he responded. "It's over, Marcus. This ends now." Marcus took a step forward, his hand resting on the handle of a gun tucked into his waistband. "You don't get it, do you?" he sneered. "I've already won." One swift motion, Hawk knocked Marcus to the ground, pinning him beneath his weight. "This is where it ends, Marcus. You're done." The rest of the Iron Riders moved in, securing Marcus's arms behind his back. They had him. Hawk stood up, his breath steady despite the fight. The night was far from over, but they had won. Marcus Viper had been brought down, and the city was safe. For now. As the crew gathered around, Hawk looked at each of them, his heart filled with pride. They had fought together, survived together, and they had won. The battle was over, but the war would always be there. And Hawk knew that as long as the Iron Riders stood together, nothing could break them.